Hello, I'm Rory McKiernan and welcome to the Love and Courage podcast. This is a community-supported podcast made possible by donors and patrons like you. You can help the podcast grow by subscribing to it, leaving a review and a rating, and by spreading the word wherever you can. You can also support by becoming a donor or a patron and receive a Love and Courage t-shirt, badge, special mentions online and discounts on future workshops and events. You can find out more at loveandcourage.org. Thanks so much for your support. It really means a lot and is hugely appreciated. I hope you enjoyed the podcast.
What I believe is that spirituality is about the truth. It's about the truth of who we are, and really discovering ourselves in that true self, that true being that we are. And whatever will help us on that journey is good. If it's about truth and love and peace and justice, if it's about that, it's good.
My guest in this episode is one of Ireland's most well-known and respected social visionaries. Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, otherwise affectionately known as Sister Stan, is the founder of 4 leading Irish organisations: Focus Ireland, The Sanctuary, the Immigrant Council of Ireland and Young Social Innovators. Now in her mid-70s, she has been a tireless voice for justice for over 50 years and has been a huge champion for the benefits of mindfulness and meditation. A former member of the Council of State, a keynote speaker and an author of numerous books, there is no end to Sister Stan's achievements and talents. I love doing this interview with Sister Stan in her office at the Sanctuary, and I hope you enjoy listening. Sister Stan, thanks very much for taking the time to join me for the Love and Courage podcast. How is life with you these days?
Life is good, thank God. Good. Yeah, I'm well. I'm healthy and all's good. All's good. Maybe around me things aren't so good, but I am well myself.
Yeah, we were saying there just when we met up that the world is in massive flux right now, and obviously the world has always been in flux, but we're going through some testing times. Are you feeling that? So we're here in the Sanctuary, which is maybe I'll let you explain what the Sanctuary is. I think you'll do a much better job than me.
Well, the Sanctuary is a centre in the middle of the city of Dublin, and it's a place, I suppose, of peace and stillness and beauty. And I suppose it came about because I was working in the inner city. It was the early years of Focus Ireland, and I was working. There was a lot of demands and a lot of stress, I suppose, for workers. And I suppose I had this idea, if there was a place that people could go to find rest and respite and peace and stillness, which would be restorative. And I had this kind of a dream of if there was a place you could open a door in the city and you'd go into a place that was beautiful and that was still and peaceful, and that in itself it would speak to the stillness and beauty within people, and in that way it would restore them. So I had this dream, and then I went around looking for a place, and finally I got this place. I got the site from the Sisters of Charity after a lot of asking, and we converted into being a centre of meditation and mindfulness. So now it's a place where we have a lot of courses and programmes for different people, for children, for young people, for adults, men and women, that really help people to find stillness in their daily life. And it's also a beautiful place. So that's where it is. And in a way, I suppose, for me, it was very different from what I was doing before. And I think it was because of what I'm still doing. And I suppose it's because I'm work and am very much in the midst of situations that are problematic, that are difficult, that have no very clear maybe solutions, that I saw the need for the other centre to be there that would help people on that journey. And I suppose it's part of myself that I have 2 parts. I'm very much drawn to action, very much drawn to do something about things, and at the same time I have this great need for silence as well. And I suppose the two come together in my life, and the two come together here in the sanctuary too.
Yeah, I can very much identify with all of that. The desire for action, but the need for silence, and that's one I have myself. And I live close to a park and a beach, and myself and Susan often talk about, would we be ever able to live in the city again, because that we can't do our work in the world unless we can kind of counterbalance it.
Yes.
And I've been fortunate enough as well to benefit from the sanctuary several times, several training courses, and every time I come back in, it does feel like you're not just going through a physical door, you're going through a, I don't know if it's a metaphysical door, but it certainly shifts the energy. And just thinking about the different aspects of despair in the world, it literally does provide sanctuary from that.
Yes, it does. And there is, I suppose I feel we all have to do our bit to create more positivity in society, and to be more positive in it. But one way to do that is through meditation. I certainly don't think it's the only way, but I think it's a very real way of bringing peace in the world. And if we really believe in the interconnectedness of all things, so if I am meditating here with a group, that has a huge effect on the rest of the world. Now, as well as that, of course, there is the whole business of recognizing ourselves as social beings and recognizing ourselves as people with social responsibility, and taking that kind of responsibility as well in an active way.
Yeah, so this interest in meditation and mindfulness, obviously it's not a million miles away from being religious in one sense, but it's not all religious people that would necessarily practice in that way. That obviously they're used to the practice of prayer, but not necessarily that.
And many people come here wouldn't actually be used to the practice of prayer. They would come because they recognise for themselves how meditation helps them. And it wouldn't be necessarily be from a religious point of view. I'd say many people, or most people who come here, don't go to churches, but they would come to meditate because they find this helps them to find peace in their lives, but also they see the value of it for the whole of society. But it is for me, meditation is prayer. And for me, as I suppose, as a person that comes from a Christian tradition, I would see that whole business of entering into the silence within us is entering into the God within us, the Spirit of God dwelling in us. So it's very much being present to God and living in that presence of God. But a person needn't necessarily believe that. A person can really seek that stillness within them and be with that stillness and be people of peace. And so people come here from all kinds of traditions or from no faith tradition, but come to practice meditation. And that's the great thing about it. I have no problem in saying that it comes from a Christian tradition. That's where it came from, that's where it's come from. But it is open to the other traditions and welcomes and embraces the other traditions, because we're all going in the one direction. If a person's seeking meditation and seeking the stillness within them, we're basically going in the same direction.
And I remember, I don't know, was it yourself or someone I heard or read talking about, so we're familiar that a lot of meditative practice and tradition comes from the East, from Tibet and India and so on. But whoever, I think it might have been yourself, talking about the Desert Fathers, or this idea of watchfulness, that in the Christian tradition there is, or there was, more focus on that. Or
absolutely. Like in the 2nd and 3rd century, the Desert Fathers and Mothers, they did go into the desert to practice meditation, and they had they developed extraordinary people who really led the way and helped people who went into the desert to learn from how to meditate. And they had this this watchfulness, that's what they called it, attentiveness or watchfulness. And they also had this, what they called the sacrament of the present moment, which was really being in the present moment, and that was seen as sacramental. So that goes back to that time, continued then and changed over the years. And at one point it really became just what people did in monasteries, whether there were monks or nuns, and it was very confined in that way. And then even though in the East meditation continued from the same time, same period, and you had the Buddha, who was 500 years pre-Christian, they developed their own tradition of meditation, which developed mostly in the East. But it wasn't then until the people particularly from the Buddhist tradition, started to move into the West, went to the States and really found their monasteries of monks and nuns, and then asked them, what was the difference between what they were doing and what the Buddhists were doing? And that led to the monasteries bringing meditation out to communities. And so you had people like Thomas Merton, Thomas Keating, those kind of people who really realised this isn't just for us, this is for everybody, and started to bring lay people into it, or they coming out to lay people.
Yeah.
So there was a whole change in that way. So it is true that a lot of meditation has come to the West from the Eastern tradition, like the Buddhists, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't a tradition all the time. But
I was down in West Clare recently in not too far away from Ennis, but certainly very remote. I can't remember the exact location, and I came across I had an American visitor, so I was doing as you do, you follow signs for castles and all sorts of old ruins and stuff, and we came across a castle, but there was a sign near it that brought us down to an old monastery of, I think it was St. Coleman, and it was, I can't remember how many hundreds of years old, but it was very old. But one of the signs pointed to desert or desert Oscailge in Irish. And I remember reading there. Oh no, it was actually, I was on the Aran Islands several months after that, and I read Dara Malloy had a book, and he, in the book, said that the word desert or desert, I'm not sure how to pronounce it right, is all over Ireland, and that there was a contemplative tradition very much alive in Ireland at one stage, but it had the direct link with the desert.
Yes.
And it entered the Irish language somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. And sure, they even down around Kerry, there definitely was their old ruins of monasteries, definitely they could go back to the 11th and 12th century. There was a very strong tradition of meditation and contemplation, very much around monasteries, though not so much, as I said, not so much available to lay people, but it was very strong, and there most definitely can show that there was a link between the Desert Fathers and what was happening in Ireland, and there are even some writings that connect places like Greece with Ireland. So there was a very strong tradition in Ireland.
So in a way, you're building a new desert in the city here in one way.
In a way, I really used to smile at myself, because I lived when I entered the convent life and the novitiate life, particularly, it was very, very monastic. And there was a lot of silence and a lot of prayer and a lot of walking in the gardens. And then that all changed with the Second Vatican Council, and you see much fewer convents now, or there are much fewer nuns, but that's a different story. But people moved into smaller houses, and then I was living in the lodge here, and then I started looking for a place that could be kind of a monastic kind of a place where people could be quiet and silent, could walk. And I was laughing to myself, because I was saying, I thought I'd never get out of that convent to live in a house, and now I'm looking for this again. But I suppose it's the need, as I said in the beginning, it's that a basic need, which I believe is in all of us, that need to be quiet, to be still, to be present. And I do believe if people build that practice into their lives, if people even did 1 minute 3 or 4 times a day, and during that minute just breathe it mindfully for 1 minute. And it's easy to do it because you can count how many breaths you take in a minute, and you can simply breathe mindfully for 1 minute. Did it 4 or 5 times a day, and if you did it 5 times a day, it would only be 5 minutes. But that could transform people's lives, I'm certain. And it's very simple practice, but people can do it. And if people did it, it would affect everything they do, because it's easy to do it, for example, before you start something new, before you move to something new. That transition could be just a mindful minute.
Yeah.
And it's building those kind of mindful moments into our lives that make the difference. Now, to come here to the sanctuary, I suppose it is a decision to spend a specific amount of time meditating, or to walk mindfully, to sit mindfully meditating. But it's like going to the gym. If you might go to the gym to exercise and to improve your exercise, and that helps you in your daily exercise, which is really the mindful practice. So they complement each other. If I'm doing the mindful practice during the day, it will help me in my meditation morning.
Yeah, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's almost like meditation is a no-brainer.
Yes,
in a way that the brain is so active, and we're being stimulated more than ever.
Yes.
And like myself in particular, with Facebook, with Twitter,
Yes.
I go through 3 or 4 newspapers a day because I'm trying to keep up with everything.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to understand what's going on in the political world, and I've got my own personal challenges with keeping house and money and work and podcasts. And so those moments are the difference between peace and happiness and chaos.
They are. It is very, very difficult for people today. It's very difficult for young people to give themselves that space to be quiet. That there is so many demands on their time. And I suppose that would have to change. I mean, one of the things we did here was we called mindful use of technology, to help young people, to take time out from technology. And I think we need a lot more of that, but it should be part of education.
Yeah.
Part of schools, part of everything now contributes to more and more noise in our heads.
That's for sure. So listen, you mentioned Kerry earlier. Let's go back to Kerry, and this is where it all began really for you. What was life like for you growing up? What kind of a household, and what were you like as a young woman or a young girl even?
Well, I come from a very rural part of Kerry. I come from Lisbole, which is between Tralee and Dingle, just about 3 miles east of Dingle. And I came from a farm. There were 5 of us, 5 children, and my parents, and a very, I suppose, simple way of life, rural way of life, but a place of great beauty. So it was, I suppose you would say, very uneventful in many ways, and yet I suppose we thought everything was an event. And I suppose the thing I remember most about was the freedom, the absolute freedom to come and go, and to walk up the hills and through the valleys, and an absolute freedom and fearlessness, and joyful in nature, and really being with the beauty of the hills and the sea, and I suppose absorbing that. And the other thing I suppose that I didn't realise at all then, but I realised it after I left it, and I particularly realise it now, is having time to spend, having time to waste, and time for each other. The amount of time people spend together chatting, young people meeting older people, listening to each other, that was so natural. people cooperating with them, with one another, with the whole idea of Michal and that working the farm in that way.
You were farming people.
We were farming,
most people would have been there.
Yes, yeah, we were farming. Yeah, we were farmers. My mother's father was a fisherman. He came from west of Dingle. But it was that whole, I suppose, that one with nature and that one with each other. There was somebody saying to me the other day that where she's working, that there happens to be a lot of older people near it, so she's always bumping into them, and she says she has to really brace herself and say, oh, I have to stop and say hello to this person, and then she feels really guilty because she knows that of course it's a good thing to spend time with older people, but she said in a way they're in the way of my work. And I was talking to her about where I came from and how that never occurred to anyone, that older people or slower people were in the way, they were part of the community. So I suppose I learned an awful lot from that community. On the other hand, I also learned that if you were a bit different, it wasn't exactly the best place, or if you were poor, none of us were well off. We were all poor, in the sense that there were small farms. My parents were particularly interested in education. They were determined we'd go to school, we'd be educated, and saved money to educate us in that way. And many families do that. Not every family were able to do that. They didn't have a farm, they didn't have a shop, they didn't have anything. They were a bit poorer. And I knew they were different. And I knew they were treated differently in school. And I think that's really what affected me more than anything, is that I knew this was so there. And I used to ask my mother, why was this so, and was this the same elsewhere? And all she said to me was, you just go and study and you'll be fine and you'll do this and do that. Of course, when I came to the city, I knew that the divisions were greater. But it was that kind of, I wouldn't have been able to say, this is unequal, this is unjust. I wouldn't have been able, as a child, I wouldn't be able to say that. But I knew there was a difference. And I think that was what led me to want to do something about this difference, to want to do something about people who are poor.
And did that have a role in you becoming a nun?
It did, yeah. I then, at that time, it wasn't possible to do social work or social science. That wasn't a faculty in the university. So the way my sisters were older and they had gone on to college and they were training to be teachers and one was training to be a nurse. And I kind of knew I wanted to work more directly with the poor. And the only I read about things that were happening in other countries, but I then heard about the Sisters of Charity who worked with the poor, and who worked with poor children and poor families, and then I went to see them, and that's why I joined them really, because they were particularly interested in working with the poor, and when I went to meet them, they really impressed me, and their respect for the poor. Now that's why I joined, but that wasn't why I stayed, obviously. That when I stayed, the whole spiritual life became important.
So in another time, you could have made a different choice to be a social worker or a youth worker or a community worker. Yeah,
absolutely. You don't know.
I often think that some of the people that I come across in community work, that if they were born in different decades, they would have become priests or nuns. It's because the social service mantra is very similar in some way, not for everybody obviously, but
absolutely. There's no doubt but many, if given the opportunity, they would have followed that path. Today that's what people are doing. People aren't joining religious communities at all in Ireland. Men aren't becoming priests either, so that will go through a phase of they dying out and something new will emerge. I don't have any doubt about that, because I can see, how little groups and people, like people who come here to meditate, they're all seeking a spiritual life, a deeper life. So there will be a way into the future where new forms of spirituality will emerge, new ways of helping people to express, to live their spiritual life and to serve as well.
So that's interesting, because at some sense what I'm detecting is that you are
you're reconciled to the change of how religion is, particularly I'm talking about the Catholic Church in Ireland anyway, because it is growing in other countries perhaps. And you're basically sounding hopeful in another way, because the institution or the organisation isn't the priority here. It's that people continue to develop a way to serve and to find peace, and you don't mind how that happens. That's what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. I really do believe that we're all spiritual by nature. We have a spiritual side to us, and I really believe that will win out. The spirit will win out, and the spirit of the divine will win.
So could you elaborate on that now? Because there are going to be people listening to this who identify themselves as atheist or agnostic or whatever it is, and when some people hear the word spirituality or God or spirit even, there's a lot of tension around that.
There is, yeah. Yes, I think that's because of history. That's because their understanding of that has been very negative, and their understanding of God as being this judge, and the standing of church is very authoritarian and full of rules and regulation. That's the understanding. That's where people are coming from. But really, I suppose what I believe is that spirituality is about the truth. It's about the truth of who we are, and really discovering ourselves in that true self, that true being that we are. And whatever will help us on that journey is good. If it's about truth and love and peace and justice, if it's about that, it's good. I don't have any doubt.
That reminds me of thinking about Gandhi, because in some ways I think Gandhi's philosophies were, I think one of them was termed satyagraha, and it was this pursuit of the truth and a worship of the truth, no matter what the truth is, which is an interesting, and that's an exploration. It's not necessarily a destination.
No, it isn't. But the truth will lead you to peace. The truth will lead you to stillness, and the truth will lead you to your true self.
So can I ask you that? Obviously there are figures like Jesus and many others in every religious tradition, but we're brought up, particularly in Ireland, with a definition or a concept of God as mostly a man maybe in his 50s. I can't remember. I'm trying to get the picture in my head.
Yes.
And he's certainly a white guy.
Yes.
And he generally has a big beard. Maybe he's in his 60s.
Yeah.
And he's a bit cranky, isn't he?
Yes.
So, I mean, personally, I don't buy it, right? And God, for me, can be many different things, or nothing, or it can be something to one person and something to somebody else. Is that where you're at with this?
Oh yeah, I think a lot of people were brought up to that God was somebody to be feared. But then if you're a Christian, if you follow the Christian tradition and you read the life of Jesus or the Gospels, the words of Jesus, they're all about love and peace. So that shows us a different God. And I suppose the God for me, the Jesus for me, was the God who particularly loved the people on the margins, and who particularly restored people's dignity and gave the people on the margins a new sense of themselves, who brought them in. If you read the stories, any of the stories in the Gospel, it was always bringing the people on the margin into the centre. And really, whether they were people who were lepers, or whether they were people who were tax collectors, or whether they were sinners, or they were in prostitution, whatever, for them, they were, for Jesus, really important. And they were people that he really showed the rest of the people that they had an importance and they had a dignity. So that for me showed me a God of mercy, a God of love, a God of justice, a God of compassion. And that is my God. And I suppose, as well as that, working then with poorer people and working people who are homeless, and you hear their stories, and they tell you more about society and the way it operates and the way it excludes them, and their need for this love, and their need to be included, and their need for somebody like Jesus in their lives, who showed them and gave them dignity. So it is the God of liberty, the God of love and peace.
And this is very topical because we've just lived through 8 years of austerity, and for me it feels that it's almost like a war on the poor in some ways, and because we were told that there wasn't this money to go around anymore, but when you look at the research and the statistics, there's actually been increases in wealth in a small portion of the population, which I think has led us to this horrible scenario of division and almost a road to fascism in one way. But the poor become the problem, and they're not. The poor are the symptom of the problem in a way.
Yeah.
Well, I don't mean to kind of categorise people in that way either.
Oh no, but it's true. It is absolutely true. There are in Ireland many people who don't know there was a recession at all. It had no effect on them. Many people. It's not just the top people who are well off and who got richer, but there are many people that it didn't affect at all. At all. And people would say that to you. Better off people whom it didn't affect. And then there are other people that, like the low-paid worker, the unemployed, the poor people, the one-parent families, all those, they have suffered enormously, and the poverty that exists in some parts of our country it's incredible. It's unbelievable this day and age, and not only that, but it's never talked about now. I mean, I was involved in the Combat Poverty Agency. I was the first chair of Combat Poverty in 1974. And the first time we talked openly about poverty, and there was a paper done on the show that 25% of the population were living below the poverty line. That startled people, because people hadn't thought about it. And all from that time on until the 90s, it was constantly brought to people's mind. There was a certain number of people living in poverty, a certain number of children living in consistent poverty. You never hear it now. This isn't talked about.
Well, they dismantled the Combat Poverty Agency, which is almost telling in itself.
They did. And since then, there are no papers produced on poverty. Occasionally you hear somebody talking about poverty. Yeah. But it isn't. But it is. It is awful. And you have the awful situation of homelessness that has increased year upon year upon year upon year for the past 15 years. And now it's totally out of control. Now it is an absolute crisis. And yet we hear the plans and the plans and the plans. And now we have a lot of demands looking for increases in wages and salaries. And you have people with no homes. You know, you have 2,400 children in bed and breakfast, in bedrooms, in hotels or in B&Bs. And it's not just here and there. They're everywhere. I was talking to a person yesterday who was doing some work with people in B&Bs, and she works in a bed and breakfast in the city centre, where there are 90 families in 90 rooms. 90 families. There might be 3 or 4 children in that family in one room, and then there's another family and another family. 90 of them in a bed and breakfast in the middle of our city. That's only one example. I mean, because people get the impression, oh, sure, they're in hotel rooms, they're grand.
Yeah, the hotel is a misnomer.
It's
here.
a misnomer.
Yeah, because what do you have? Many of us like to spend more than a night in a hotel.
And even with that, you have a nice room, and you go down to the dining room and have.
So where do you wash your clothes?
Exactly.
You've no sink. You've no
nothing. Where do you wash? Where do you cook? Yeah. Where do the children play?
How
Where
do you build
the
life?
homework?
Yeah.
How do you build a life?
So I think like a lot of the stress there's physical restrictions, but there's a mental stress to that.
Hugely.
That is driving people.
Hugely. Yeah. And the children are going to be damaged. Believe me, some children are born into that.
Yeah.
Literally, and I know of women who were in B&Bs. They went from there to go into the hospital to have their baby and brought their baby back to the B&B. So the children are born into it and reared into it. So, I mean, That is scandalous in this day and age in Ireland. But that's the kind of divisions you have in Ireland. Now, it's hardly talked about. It's talked about because I suppose we're highlighting the fact that people are in hotel rooms, but it's the awfulness of the hotel rooms, and it's also the fact it's worse than the tenements where you had the big houses in town where there were many families, but they had a kind of a community. They knew each other. In hotel rooms, they don't mix. Yeah. They're not allowed to mix. Yeah. They stay by themselves.
And I think some of them have to go in the back entrance.
Oh, they do. They do. Yeah.
Tell me this. Like, you've been around these issues a long time now.
Long.
Right? And you're kind of banging the same drum for justice, if you like, and homelessness and a range of other issues. Do you ever feel that... I mean, do you ever get sick banging the drum, or feel that people might be sick hearing that and go, "Oh, that's your one, and that's what she..." Because it's something that comes up for me now, because I make it my business to kind of keep shaking the cage.
Yes.
Because I'm not prepared to retreat into silence whilst I see what I see.
Yes.
But I don't want to be that guy either.
I know.
I'd wish somebody else would come on and we can all do it together. And I don't know.
It is true. I think. To be honest, I think all I know is that these problems exist, these divisions exist, this terrible suffering exists, and it drives me on. It just drives me on. So I mean, there certainly at times I feel, I wish I wasn't saying that over and over again. But I don't really think too much about what people think of me or what people because you couldn't stop when you know it's so bad.
Yeah,
you're compelled.
You're compelled,
to go on saying it.
And you've seen out a few Taoiseachs, prime ministers, presidents, Taoiseachs, ministers, heads of agencies. They've come and they've gone, and you've met them. And now we're probably going to face a change of government at some stage in the very near future, and maybe we'll have new old faces. We may have Fianna Fáil, or we don't know who we'll have. But like, if you had any, like if you have Enda Kenny, who I'm sure you've met, and you've been on the Council of State a couple of times as well. If we had Enda Kenny in here today, and we had, say, Micheál Martin and a couple of heads of the other parties, like, what do you say to them, or do you bother? Like, I mean, are they hearing this, or is their world so complex, that world of leadership, that, I mean, are they doing their best? Are they not doing it? Are they hearing it? Is the compassion lost? Are they ideologues? Because problems can be fixed.
Oh, problems can be fixed. I think there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's huge bureaucracy that prevents things happening.
But isn't that what they'll tell you?
Yeah.
And then that becomes the excuse, and they've done away with you for another year.
Yeah, but it is a fact. But I think politicians can overrule that if they want to. Of course they can. I mean, there's the situation.
So you're saying that they don't want to then? Do you know, that's what is causing the fundamental lack of leadership to sort these issues?
I think they're tied into the system. They're tied in to the system that is the structure that exists. They're connected. They're not really about bringing about justice and equality. They're about keeping people happy, and they keep people happy at the different levels.
Keeping some people happy.
Oh, some people. But then if they give the €5 extra in the pension or whatever they did in the last budget, they think they will keep that group happy for the moment. So they're trying to keep a lid on that, and they're keeping. It's all really about political expedience. It's absolutely not about bringing about a fair and just society. On top of that, we have a political system that really isn't working. And a political system where you have, as you said, politicians in for a certain length of time. They know they have so many years. They know that they want to do this much in that year, and to hell with what happens afterwards. So they don't have kind of a statesman or womanship approach where they're thinking of the issue and how long will it take to. So then you need people in political life who have the long view, and who are prepared to work towards that long term. Not everything will happen immediately, but they have to do it in a way that there's an immediate thing needs to be done, a short term needs to be done, And long term, if you take the housing homeless, they're not going to resolve the homeless situation. It's out of control right now, they're not. What they can do is they can stop the flow of people into it. Every week there's more and more people becoming homeless. They can stop the flow into it. They can do something in the short term by bringing modular houses immediately available to take people out of the awful situations of bed and breakfast. And they can have their long-term plan as well. But they're not doing all those three together. They're not stopping the flow. The modular houses are so slow in coming about. But they have the long term. They tell us about the 20,000 houses that they will build within this period of time and so on. And I know it takes time, but I think they must be ruthless about doing something about it now. And to be honest, now I hear all the civil servants, public servants out looking for this and that and the other. I really think the government should say, no, I'm sorry, we're going to do something about housing and homeless right now. And that's where we're going to put our resources. Because it's an emergency, it is a crisis.
Yeah, and like food and shelter are the basics of society. If you don't have that...
Absolutely. You're damaging children for the future. And that's the kind of leadership that I would like to see at this time.
And migration and immigration has also been another interest of yours over the years and led you to found the Immigrant Council of Ireland at a time when we didn't really understand much about inward immigration. We were very much sending people out, and to some extent we still are. What led you to tackle that issue or approach it?
Yeah, I suppose it's like everything else. I suppose it's my own experience. You know, I'd been running Focus Ireland. I'd pulled back from running it, and I was still with it, on the board, and it's developing the national part of it. But I was really conscious about migrants coming into the country. I was conscious of their visibility in the city, and I just wondered about it. And there was a lot of talk at the time about asylum seekers, coming, and there was concern in the government about too many coming. And I wondered about the other people who were coming into work, because there were a lot of migrants coming into work. And I talked to anybody I could, really, about it, like the Irish Civil Liberties, people like that who knew a little about migration. And I concluded there was nothing done practically for people who came into work or study. There was nothing to help them to understand the system, to navigate their way through the system, to any kind of social help, any kind of help that would help them to identify their needs or help them to or support their rights. And it was with that in mind that I set up the Immigrant Council as a centre that would be there to support the rights, promote and support the rights of immigrants. And a lot of work was done at that time. There was the whole business of work permits. The work permits were given to employers, not the employee, and there was a lot of injustice, a lot of terrible things were happening. So we did a lot of work to put that right. And then other issues emerged. And so we continued in that vein. And so it was, for me, the need. Once people start to come, you discover other needs. The whole business of family reunification, that wasn't on the agenda. And there were people here who couldn't bring their spouses in, who couldn't bring their children in, and we lobbied for that. So the Immigrant Council became really, it became a law centre, but it became a way of helping people navigate the system, but also to influence policy. And I think it did that very well. Now the thing is changing. It's changing radically now with the whole migrant crisis in Europe. And that's a whole area that we in the Immigrant Council have to look at again and how we are going to change now, because it's one of those things, when you start to do something, other organisations come in, they do similar things. So you have other organisations now doing some of the things that we did, and so it's a question now we are looking at, where are we going now? What are we going to do about this migrant crisis? How are we going to help society to be open and welcoming to migrants, because that's reality. The migrant situation is not going to go away.
That is in some ways the hot issue of our time, and there may even be people listening to this that have their doubts about immigration, and particularly there's no point in saying the elephant in the room is what some people want us to believe is a clash of cultures and civilizations, and we now have talk of forming a list, a register of Muslim people in the US, a state list, which the last time something like that happened was in Nazi Germany. But what do you say to that person in urban or rural Ireland that they're decent people, they working their asses off, they maybe go to Mass on a Sunday, and they genuinely concerned for Irish culture or people getting free houses? You know, you've heard the kind of, and there is a kind of a fear there that, well, we need to stem the tide, we can't cope with all of this. What do you say to them?
I think, again, it's back, we need great leadership from our politicians, and we need a good information and education system that will bring information right down to rural Ireland, different parts of Ireland, about migration and its meaning. We need private and public partnership where the people in areas and communities in parishes around the country are helped to participate in the whole migrant situation. They've done that really well in Canada, you know, where they have led by the Prime Minister, where they have really invited local communities to become partners. And so a local community could decide, well, you have a house, you have room in it, I have money, and so-and-so's languages, and so-and-so does community service. And so they pool their resources and they decide, okay, we can take so many migrants into this community and we'll all work to welcome them.
It's done in partnership, and that's the difference.
It's done in partnership. Yeah. And that's what Ireland can do. And that's the kind of thing I think we must be saying, and we must continue to say, that it is a possibility. I did, just the recent thing I did in writing the op-ed for the Times, and then in doing some radio programmes, I had many letters from people around the country who said, look, I want to help. I'm a retired teacher. I have room in my house. I want these kind of letters. There are people who really want to do it. And it's like everything else. I've always believed this since I was in Kilkenny, that people only see the issue when they see ways of resolving it. I remember we introduced Meals on Wheels in Kilkenny way back in the 60s when there were no Meals on Wheels in Ireland. And people said, what's Meals on Wheels? People cooked all their life. What are you bringing in this new thing for? And we started to do it. And we started to provide a few meals for a few people who were willing to take them. And by degrees, people came and said, oh, I know so-and-so, and I know so-and-so, and I know so, and they'd love a meal. So once they saw it was possible to do it, and that it wasn't harming to anyone, they came, and so the Meals on Wheels developed. Similarly with other services.
So you're what some people would call a social innovator, and you see the social need and you create the innovation. How do we cultivate a society where more people see themselves as social innovators, that they, and indeed you helped, you know, yourself and Rachel and others helped set up Young Social Innovators. You led that way for young people to become social innovators. How do we get everyone to think that they can take a lead on this and not rely on the same cohort of individuals or groups?
Yeah, well, I think education is a big thing. I really do think that we should have much more social and political education in schools. And I think that would make a huge difference to help people to see their own creativity and their ability to innovate. And I think Young Social Innovators, as one way, is a great help to young people because they realise they can do something about some issue and they can display this in a showcase, and that never leaves you. I think if you do something like when you're young, even if you go away for a while, you come back to it. And I think that's one very important way to help people, that show people they can be that. I think that organisations that are very active in the community should have that kind of an innovative side to them, in the sense that I think, for example, the GAA is an extraordinary organisation and so rooted in the community, around every parish, around everywhere. I think that could do more on the social side. I think it's possible for it. I think it gives great leadership. I think that's the kind of thing I'd like to see. So it isn't isolated.
And the GAA was set up as a social, cultural organisation, more so than even a sporting organisation.
Absolutely. And look at the credit unions were set up totally as social organisations in Austria and Germany. And they've changed radically, but they really have that possibility of become community sort of very much open community service. So there are organisations that can develop that side to them. I suppose you need leadership for that too. You do.
What do you say to anybody that's listening and has a kind of a frustration in their work or in their life, and they know that they just want to be doing more in the community or do something, but they just don't know how to start?
Yes. I suppose most people would know organisations of one kind or another. And I think it's a question of they then kind of sussing that out and see what they will do. And some people are better at that than others. And again, I suppose I'd come back to places where people meet, that there should be that opportunity for people, like churches really. For those the churches are relevant for, they should always be offering people the opportunity to give. Because I do think that whole business of compassion and benevolence and giving, it really is great for people and it's great for communities. It really has an extraordinarily positive effect. And people maybe who may have some mental illness or who may have some depression or something like that, the opportunity to give can make all the difference in the world. So I think that that should be promoted as something good in society.
Yeah. And especially at a time when we have a mental health crisis as well. We've any number of crises. We've ecological crisis, financial crisis, but in some ways they all come from the same place.
They do.
A dysfunctional core of value.
Exactly.
But I do find and I've been through some hard times myself where you can end up ultimately feeling sorry for yourself. And what's the word there? One of the causes of depression is the rumination.
Absolutely.
And to hack into that and to go, well, today I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm going to go out and help somebody else. And it changes the course of the river.
Totally.
The stream of the river just changes.
Absolutely. Helping somebody else. And also giving people the opportunity to help. Giving people the opportunity to help us. This simple thing of asking somebody that you think isn't feeling so good today to do something for you. Yeah. That whole business of that compassion, that extension of compassion, that extension of kindness, that can change people's lives, can change whole communities.
So you're talking about asking for help. We're going to finish up now, but I want to take this opportunity to say, do you need help with anything? Because there might be people listening that have time, skills, money, and you're involved in so much good work, and it doesn't come cheap either. And so there's in particular.
We need a lot of volunteers who will work in any of the areas I'm working in, whether it is with homeless people, whether it's with immigrants, or whether it is in sanctuary. We a lot of volunteers. Obviously, if people have resources and they can help financially in any of the organisation, that is really welcome. And I suppose I just think. Because I believe in it, that whole business of the compassionate society, that if people want to give, please come to me and say you want to give, and I'd be delighted to give you that opportunity to give.
So, Stan, final word. It sounds to me from everything you've said, you're very aware of the injustices, the challenges of society, but on the whole, you're hopeful.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful because I see the hope in people. I see people who are really down their luck, who have nothing, and yet when you give them a little help, it can transform their life, a little bit of help. So that really gives me great hope. The other thing is, and this has always been so, the people when I started doing, the people who've come around me, who've helped me to do what I was trying to do, people much more competent, much more creative, much more gifted than me, in many ways. And they came round to help me to do what I was doing and still do that. And that gives me a great sense of hope because I think it can happen again and again.
Reminds me of that saying, if you build it, they will come.
That's right, that's true. That is for sure, yeah.
It was lovely talking to you. Thanks, Rory.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Love and Courage podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd really love if you could subscribe to the podcast, rate it and review it, and spread the word on social media and wherever you can. While I love doing these interviews, they take a lot of time and effort in research, production, post-production and publicity, and there are some costs involved. If you would like to chip in and help the podcast grow, it would be really appreciated. All contributions welcome, and monthly patrons can receive a Love and Courage t-shirt, badge, special mentions online and discounts on future workshops and events. And this support helps me to help others in the community in my day-to-day work. My sincere thanks to all of you who have already supported in so many different ways. Also, just to say, I sometimes take on social change media, communications campaigns and strategic projects, and do talks and presentations, workshops in schools and colleges, community centres and at conferences. Topics range from mental health and personal development to youth and community empowerment, leadership, activism and social innovation. If you're interested in learning more about any of this, please let me know. So to get in touch, to offer feedback or suggestions, or to make a financial contribution right now, log on to loveandcourage.org or send me an email to podcast@loveandcourage.org. Thank you so much for all your support. Until next time, here's to you, to all of us, and to having the courage to create big change in our lives and in the world around us.